The night my father's estate was supposed to be finalized, my wife Nadia stood up in front of my entire family and smiled like she was delivering the best news in the world. "I'm pregnant," she said. The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then my Aunt Cora started crying. My cousin Bayo jumped to his feet and started clapping. My Uncle Patrick looked across the long dining table at me with this wide, warm grin, like I had just done something incredible. I sat there frozen, not because I was overwhelmed with joy, not because I was caught off guard by the emotion of the moment. I sat there frozen because I had not known. Not a single word, not a single hint, not a single morning where she had seemed sick or strange or different. Nothing. We had been living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, eating breakfast together every single day for 11 years, and somehow I had not known. She looked at me across the table. Her eyes were steady, patient, practiced, and when she smiled at me, it was the kind of smile that told me she had planned every second of this. "The attorneys," she said, still looking at me, still smiling, "have already put together some paperwork, just to make sure everything is protected. For the baby." She reached into the folder, sitting in front of her, and slid a stack of documents toward the center of the table. I remember the sound of the papers hitting the wood. I remember looking down at them. I remember thinking, this is not an announcement. This is a move. I did not say anything that night. Not at the table. Not in the car. Not when we got home, and she hummed quietly to herself while washing her face in the bathroom mirror. I sat on the edge of our bed and replayed the evening in my mind, piece by piece. She had announced the pregnancy before the estate meeting had even officially started. The estate lawyer, Mr. Adewale, had barely gotten through the opening formalities when Nadia stood up and made her declaration. The timing was not accidental. It was designed to shift the atmosphere before any legal business could be discussed. And it worked. The moment she said those words, the entire mood in the room changed. My family stopped thinking about my father's estate and started thinking about a baby, about legacy, about the next generation. By the time Mr. Adewale tried to steer things back to the documents, the emotional temperature of the room had already been set, and it was set in Nadia's favor. Then came the paperwork. She told the family that her lawyers had prepared documents to ensure the unborn child's interests were protected during the estate finalization. She framed it as responsible planning. Thoughtful, forward-thinking. My Aunt Cora nodded along. My Uncle Patrick said it sounded very sensible. But I noticed something no one else seemed to catch. She had said her lawyers. Not our lawyers. Not, I spoke with a lawyer, and we agreed. She said her lawyers had prepared the documents. As if this had been in motion for some time. As if I was the last person to be informed, and the last person whose opinion mattered. I lay back on the bed that night, staring at the ceiling. I did not sleep. My father, Emmanuel Osei, was a quiet man who built things slowly. He grew up with very little, moved to this country with 2 suitcases and a handful of phone numbers, and spent 30 years turning careful decisions into a solid life. He never talked about money loudly. He just moved with intention. When he passed 8 months ago, he left behind a modest but meaningful estate, a property in the east side of the city, a savings account, a small investment portfolio, and a life insurance payout. Nothing extravagant, but enough to matter. Enough that the wrong hands around it could do real damage. He had named me sole beneficiary, not because he wanted to exclude anyone, but because I was his only child, and because he trusted me to carry things forward with the same care he had shown. Nadia had known about the inheritance before we got married. I had been honest with her about everything. That was the kind of husband I was. I believed that love meant openness. I told her about the estate, the approximate value, the timeline for finalization. I thought transparency was a form of respect. For years, I had been what I thought was a good partner. I supported her when she wanted to start her own events business. I covered the startup costs, nearly $40,000 over 2 years. I handled the household expenses while she grew her client list. I never held those things over her head. I never kept score. I gave without counting because I thought she was doing the same. That night, lying in our dark bedroom, I started to wonder if my generosity had not been appreciated, but studied. The changes had started about 5 months before the announcement. I can see that clearly now, though at the time I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Nadia started taking calls in the other room. Not all her calls, just some of them. The ones she would drop her voice for and walk away from me to handle. I would hear the low murmur of her voice through the wall, and then silence when she realized I was nearby. She started keeping her phone face down on every surface. The kitchen counter, the coffee table, the nightstand. It was small, but it was new. She had never done that before. She asked to start using a separate financial advisor. She framed it as wanting to manage her business accounts independently, which sounded reasonable on the surface. I agreed without pushing back. I did not want to seem controlling. That was a mistake. The thing that should have made me stop and think harder was a single missed call notification I saw by accident one evening. She had left her phone on the bathroom sink and walked out, and I was passing by when the screen lit up. The label read, Clinic, Dr. F. Okafor. I did not think much of it at the time. People have doctors. People get checkups. I filed it away somewhere in the back of my mind and moved on, but I never fully forgot it. Looking back now, that missed call was the first thread. If I had pulled it sooner, everything would have unraveled much faster. But I was still choosing to trust. I was still choosing to believe that my wife was who I thought she was. That belief was expensive. 3 days after the dinner announcement, I sat across from Mr. Adewale in his office on the 4th floor of a building downtown. He had asked to meet with me privately to walk through the implications of what Nadia had introduced at the family gathering. He was a careful man, measured. He set 2 folders on the desk between us and folded his hands. The documents your wife presented are based on a legal concept called unborn heir protection, he said. In simple terms, if a pregnancy is confirmed and documented before an estate is finalized, certain jurisdictions allow for the inheritance to be paused or restructured to account for the incoming dependent. I asked him to keep going. The structure your wife's attorneys are proposing would essentially freeze a portion of the estate in a trust. She would be named as temporary trustee, managing those funds until the child reaches legal age, or until other conditions are met. I leaned forward. What other conditions? He adjusted his glasses. The structure they've proposed gives the trustee considerable authority, enough that, practically speaking, she would have significant control over a large portion of what your father left you. The room felt smaller suddenly. And what do we need to stop that from happening? I asked. Certified medical documentation, he said. An authenticated pregnancy record that aligns with the official medical registry. No certified confirmation means the trust cannot be legally activated. He looked at me carefully, like he was reading something in my face. She seemed very confident, he added quietly. I just want you to be prepared. I nodded. I thanked him. And on the way out, I started to think about that missed call from the clinic. I made a decision that evening that changed everything. I decided not to react. I decided to observe. This sounds simple, but it went against everything in my body. I wanted to go home and confront Nadia directly. I wanted to put the documents on the table and demand answers. I wanted to know, right now, what was real and what was manufactured. But I had watched what happened at the dinner table. I had watched how quickly the room shifted when emotions entered the space. I had watched how my family, good, loving people, became easy to steer once someone introduced a strong feeling into the room. Nadia understood that. She had used it well. If I came in loud, I would look angry. I would look like a man trying to protect money instead of a man trying to protect truth. She would cry, and the room would shift again. So I chose silence. Strategic silence. I went home that night and behaved exactly as I had been behaving. I asked her how she was feeling. I asked if she had any cravings. I told her I was still processing the news, but that I loved her. All of it was calm. All of it was steady. Inside, I had already started building a list. The clinic name, the doctor's name, the date of the missed call, the document she had presented, which Mr. Adewale had given me a copy of, the attorney names listed on the letterhead, the specific trust structure they were proposing. I wrote it all down. Then I started, quietly and carefully, to pull on the first thread. About a week after the announcement, Nadia came into the living room while I was reading and sat across from me with a look on her face that I recognized. It was the look she used when she wanted to reframe something. when she wanted to move me from one position to another without it feeling like pressure. "I need you to stop hesitating," she said. I put down my book. "I'm not hesitating. I'm processing." "It's been over a week," she said. "The attorneys need a response. The meeting with the estate can't wait forever." "Estates take time," I said calmly. "Mr. Adewale said there's no hard deadline yet." Her face shifted slightly. "I'm carrying your child, and you're sitting here acting like this is some kind of business negotiation. Do you understand how that makes me feel?" I looked at her. I kept my voice even. "I want to do this right. That's not cruelty. That's care." She stood up. "You're afraid of responsibility. That's what this is." "Maybe," I said. She had expected pushback. She had expected me to defend myself, to get flustered, to fill the silence with explanations. But when I gave her almost nothing, she did not know where to go with the energy she had brought into the room. She walked toward the hallway, then stopped. "If you keep stalling," she said, not turning around, "I'll have to explain to the family why this is taking so long. And I'll have to be honest about your attitude." It was not quite a threat, but it was not far from one either. "Okay," I said, and I picked up my book. The following week, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. I had been going through the estate files at home, organizing documents, reviewing what my father had left behind, when I noticed an email thread forwarded to me by Mr. Adewale. It had been flagged for my attention as part of the estate process. Nadia had submitted a formal request to access a portion of the estate's liquid assets before the finalization meeting. She had framed it as a necessary step to prepare the household for the incoming dependent. The request cited her proposed trustee status as the basis for early access. She had not mentioned this to me, not once. She was at home every single day. We had conversations about the estate. She never said a word about this request. She had gone around me entirely, directly to the estate office, and attempted to access funds using a legal status she did not yet officially hold. The estate office had flagged it as irregular and sent it to Mr. Adewale, who sent it to me. I sat with that email for a long time. This was not a woman who had gotten excited about a pregnancy and made some impulsive decisions. This was a woman who had been working a plan. She had attorneys. She had a strategy. She had already made moves I was not aware of. And she had done all of this while looking me in the eyes every single morning and saying good night to me every single evening. I did not confront her. I forwarded the email to a private folder and kept going. The social pressure arrived from a direction I did not expect. My Aunt Cora called me on a Tuesday afternoon. She is my father's older sister, warm, well-meaning, and the kind of woman whose opinion carries weight in our family without her having to raise her voice. "I just want to check on you," she said. "I'm fine, Annie. Nadia said you've been a little distant, a little cold since the announcement." She paused. "That's not like you, Emmanuel Jr." I closed my eyes briefly. "I'm just being careful with the estate process. There's a lot to manage." "She's carrying your child," Aunt Cora said, gentle but firm. "That should come first." After I got off the phone, I sat quietly for a while. Nadia had been making calls. She had been talking to family members, planting a picture of me as someone pulling away at the worst possible moment. She was building a story around me before I had a chance to build one around the truth. 2 days later, my cousin Bayo came by the house unannounced. He said he was just checking in, but the things he said made it clear he had been briefed. He talked about responsibility, about family legacy, about how his own father had once been afraid of commitment and how it had damaged relationships for years. He was not talking about his father, but in the middle of all of it, he said something that caught my attention. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Between us," he said, "the timeline is a little strange. She said she found out recently, but some of the things she's describing don't quite add up to me." I listened carefully. "Just be alert," he said. "That's all I'm saying." The detail that Mr. Adewale mentioned in our second private meeting stopped me mid-sentence. He was walking me through the formal requirements for activating the trust structure Nadia's attorneys had proposed. He went through the list methodically: identification documents, relationship proof, financial disclosures. Then he said, "Of course, the medical certification has to be current, authenticated, and match the official pregnancy registry record. Both must align." "What do you mean by align?" I asked. The document your wife provided lists a clinic and attending physician, he said. For the trust to be legally activated, the clinic must confirm that the documented visit occurred, and the physician's registration must be verifiable through the National Medical Licensing Board. Both things have to check out. He said it casually, like it was routine information. But the moment he said it, something clicked in the back of my mind. The missed call. Dr. F. Okafor. A clinic. I had never heard her mention that name before or since. I had never seen a clinic appointment card. I had never noticed any medical paperwork around the house. For a woman who was supposedly pregnant and had already engaged attorneys and drafted trust documents, there was a striking absence of any of the normal small signs of pregnancy. No prenatal vitamins on the counter. No pamphlets. No cautious eating. No morning sickness. No follow-up appointments mentioned. Nothing. I drove home that evening with one thought repeating itself in my mind. What if the medical record she submitted was not real? I pulled up the document she had given the estate office. I laid it flat on my desk, and I started reading it very carefully for the first time. I'm not a medical professional. I have never worked in healthcare, but I have spent years as a project manager, and my entire career has been built on reading documents carefully and catching errors before they become problems. The record Nadia had submitted was 2 pages. It was printed on what looked like clinic letterhead. It listed her name, a date of visit, a gestational estimate, and a physician's name and license number at the bottom. I started with the formatting. The font was slightly off. Not dramatically. Most people would never notice. But the spacing between certain lines was inconsistent in a way that institutional documents usually are not. Government forms, hospital records, official letters, they are generated by software. The spacing is always uniform. This was not. Then I looked at the clinic name, Greenway Maternal Health Center. I searched for it online. It appeared in a basic directory listing, a name, an address, a phone number. No website, no patient portal, no social media presence. Nothing beyond the bare minimum that would make something appear legitimate in a quick search. I wrote down the address and the physician's license number from the bottom of the record. Then I went to the National Medical Licensing Board's public verification portal and entered the number. The search returned nothing. Not license expired. Not license suspended. Just nothing. No record of that number in the system at all. I sat back in my chair. My heart was beating very fast, but I kept my hand still. I wrote down exactly what I had found, when I had found it, and where I had looked. I saved screenshots. I created a folder and labeled it simply, verification. Then I made a list of the next steps I needed to take. The next morning, I called the licensing board directly. I told them I was a private individual trying to verify a physician's credentials for a legal matter and asked if they could confirm whether a license number was registered in the system. The woman I spoke to was polite and efficient. She took the number. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry, sir. That number does not correspond to any licensed physician in our registry. It's possible you've been given an incorrect number, or maybe a number from another jurisdiction. Is there any possibility it could be valid and just not showing up?" I asked. "No," she said. "Our registry is complete. If the number isn't here, it isn't valid here." I thanked her and ended the call. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my office for about 10 minutes. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel angry. I felt something closer to grief. The specific grief of having something confirmed that you had quietly hoped was not true. A part of me had still wanted to be wrong. A part of me had wanted to find out the record was fine, that the number was just from another registry, that there was a simple explanation. Because if I was wrong, it meant Nadia was still the person I had spent 11 years building a life with. But the number was not valid. The formatting was irregular. The clinic had no real digital presence, and a woman claiming to be pregnant had shown none of the daily signs of pregnancy for weeks. I drove to work. I did not tell a single person what I had found. I needed one more confirmation before I moved. That evening, I tried a different approach. I did not accuse. I did not reveal. I simply asked a question. We were eating dinner, a quiet meal, the kind we had been having more of lately, and I set down my fork and said, "I've been thinking, since we have the estate finalization coming up, maybe we should schedule a joint appointment, so I can be there with you." Hear everything from the doctor directly. Nadia looked up from her plate. That's not necessary, she said. I'd like to be involved, I said. It's our child. I've already been seen, she said. Everything is documented. That's what the record is for. I know, I said, but I'd feel better if I could come to the next appointment. Whatever the next step is, ultrasound, blood work, anything. I want to be there. She put her fork down too. Something behind her eyes shifted. Not dramatically, but I could see it. A kind of rapid calculation happening. My doctor doesn't take new attendees mid-process, she said. It's a privacy protocol. I'm your husband, I said. That's not how it works. She stood up from the table. You're questioning me. You're questioning whether I'm actually pregnant. I can't believe you. I'm not questioning anything, I said. I want to be at the appointment. She walked to the bedroom and closed the door. She did not come back out that night. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. A woman who is genuinely pregnant and genuinely wants her husband involved does not run from that request. She had not said the doctor was unavailable. She had not offered an alternative date. She had shut the conversation down entirely. Fear looks like defensiveness when it has nowhere else to go. The next day, I called Mr. Adewale and asked for an urgent private meeting. He made time for me that afternoon. I walked in, sat down, and placed my folder on his desk. I walked him through everything I had found. The formatting inconsistencies in the medical record. The clinic's bare bones, online presence. The physician's license number that did not appear anywhere in the National Registry. The call I had made to the licensing board and exactly what they had told me. I had printed everything. The screenshots, the search results, the call log. Mr. Adewale read through each page slowly. He did not interrupt. When he finished, he set the last page down and took off his glasses. This is serious, he said. I know, I said. If this record was fabricated, he said carefully, and it was submitted as part of a legal estate claim, that crosses into fraud territory. Fraudulent medical representation in an estate proceeding is not a minor thing. What does that mean for a legal position? I asked. Any spousal claim built on that documentation would be void, he said. Entirely. The trust cannot activate. The trustee request fails. And depending on how the court views the intent, there could be additional consequences. He looked at me steadily. We need certified verification from the official clinic registry. A formal response from a medical authority confirming that no such visit was recorded. How do we get that? I asked. I submit a formal verification request on behalf of the estate, he said. It carries legal weight. They must respond within a specific window. Then do it, I said. He picked up his pen. The verification request was submitted the following morning. Mr. Adewale sent it through the official estate legal channel, addressed to the Medical Records Authority for the region. He requested confirmation of whether the clinic named in Nadia's document was registered, whether the physician listed held a valid license, and whether any visit matching the details on the submitted record was on file. The response window was 10 business days. The estate finalization meeting was scheduled for 12 days from that date. It was tight, but it was enough. I went home and continued being a steady, present husband. I asked how she was sleeping. I made tea. I watched a film with her on Friday evening. She seemed to relax a little. Maybe she interpreted my calm as acceptance. Maybe she thought I had decided to stop resisting. Meanwhile, in the background, the request was moving through official channels. I did not tell anyone what I had set in motion. Not Ancora, not Bayo, not a single family member. I had learned something from watching Nadia operate. Information shared too early becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. Whatever I had found, it needed to surface at the right moment, in the right room, with the right people present to witness it. The estate finalization meeting would have Mr. Adewale, 2 independent estate officials, and my nearest family members present. It was the same room where Nadia had made her announcement. It was the room where the power had shifted once before. It was where I intended it to shift back. I counted the days. 9 left, then 8. On the 8th day before the meeting, Nadia's mood changed completely. The careful distance she had been keeping softened into something warmer, more open. She started talking about the future, about names, about which bedroom we might convert into a nursery. She mentioned that her attorneys had confirmed everything was on track and that the estate restructuring would likely be completed smoothly at the finalization meeting. She called her mother, and I overheard her say, "It's almost done." At dinner that night, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "I know this has been a hard few weeks," she said, "but we're almost on the other side. Things are going to be good. Really good." I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about 11 years. I thought about the startup money I had given her, the late nights I'd spent on her business paperwork, the arguments I had absorbed without retaliation because I believed in keeping peace. I thought about all the ways I had made myself smaller to make room for her. I thought about a clinic that had no real website and a doctor whose license did not exist. "Yeah," I said, "we're almost on the other side." She smiled. It was the most relaxed I had seen her since the night of the announcement. She believed she had already won. She believed the documents were solid, the strategy was locked in, and the only thing left was the formality of the meeting. That confidence was real, and it meant she had not prepared for the possibility that someone had been quietly pulling her plan apart, thread by thread, while she was busy celebrating. The finalization meeting was held on a Thursday morning. The same dining room as before, the long table, the family chairs, the quiet weight of my father's presence still somehow in the walls of that room. I had arrived early and sat alone in there for a few minutes before anyone else came in. Mr. Adewale sat at the head of the table with two official estate representatives beside him. My Aunt Cora sat to my left. Bayo was across from me. 3 other relatives had come, cousins, and uncle. Nadia sat to my right, composed and dressed carefully, a small notebook in front of her. Her 2 attorneys sat at the far end of the table. The meeting opened formally. Mr. Adewale reviewed the estate inventory. He outlined the original terms of my father's will. He explained the standard process for finalization and what signatures would be required at the close. Then he paused. "Before we proceed to the final signatures," he said, "there is a matter that requires resolution." A formal verification request was submitted on behalf of this estate regarding the medical documentation provided in support of the proposed trust restructuring. I felt Nadia shift slightly in her chair beside me. Her attorney glanced toward her briefly. "We received a response from the relevant medical authority," Mr. Adewale continued. He opened a sealed envelope that had been sitting in front of him since we all sat down. The sound of the paper was very clear in the quiet room. He read it silently first. His expression did not change. When he finished, he placed the letter flat on the table and looked up. "I will read this aloud," he said. Mr. Adewale read the letter clearly and without rush. The medical authority had investigated the verification request thoroughly. They had searched their registry for the clinic named in the submitted document, Greenway Maternal Health Center. The clinic was not registered with the Regional Health Authority. It did not appear in any official licensed facility database for the region. The room stayed quiet. A few people exchanged glances across the table. He continued reading. The physician named in the document, Dr. F. Okafor, held no valid license in the National Medical Registry. The license number printed on the submitted record did not correspond to any registered practitioner, current or historical. Aunt Cora made a sound, small, involuntary, like something had shifted in her chest. Mr. Adewale set the letter down carefully. The medical record submitted in support of the proposed trust restructuring cannot be authenticated, he said. Accordingly, the trust cannot be legally activated. Nadia's attorney leaned forward immediately. "This may be a clerical error," he said. "Records can be misfiled. The documentation was provided in good faith. We can source alternative. The licensing board does not misfile license numbers," Mr. Adewale said simply. "The number either exists in the registry or it does not. This one does not." Nadia's other attorney opened her mouth, but Nadia put a hand on her arm and pressed it down gently. I looked at Nadia. For the first time since the announcement dinner, she looked at me too. Not with warmth, not with calculation, just looking, like she was trying to understand when the ground beneath her had quietly given way. Her face had gone still. No one at the table was looking at me with suspicion anymore. Mr. Adewale was not finished. He picked up a second document from the folder in front of him, a supplementary report from the verification process. He explained that as part of the standard follow-up when a document fails initial authentication, a cross-check is performed against the regional pregnancy registry to confirm whether any independent record exists. No pregnancy had been registered under Nadia's name within the past 12 months. Not recently. Not at all. The registry contained no record of any kind. The room absorbed this in complete silence. The kind of silence that is not peaceful but heavy, the kind where everyone is processing something they did not expect to be asked to process today. My cousin Bayo sat very still. Aunt Cora had both her hands flat on the table, staring down at them. One of the other relatives, my Uncle Patrick, slowly took off his glasses, as if he needed the moment to be slightly blurry. Nadia's lead attorney began speaking rapidly about privacy laws and the voluntary nature of registry entries and jurisdictional inconsistencies. The words kept coming, filling the air, but they were not landing anywhere. No one at the table was following the argument. Everyone was looking at Nadia. She did not speak. Her attorney kept going. She did not join in. She made no effort to support the argument being made on her behalf. She just sat there. The notebook in front of her was untouched. The composure she had worn for weeks had simply dissolved. Not dramatically, not with tears or outburst. It just left her face entirely. And the room, which had felt tilted against me for weeks, quietly leveled itself. The silence stretched long enough that even her attorneys stopped talking. Mr. Adewale looked around the table. "I'll give everyone a moment," he said. Mr. Adewale looked at me then. "Was there anything you wanted to add at this time?" I had thought about this moment a lot. I had imagined it going several different ways. I had imagined feeling triumphant or angry or sad. But sitting there in that room, I mostly felt clear. "About 3 weeks ago," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I noticed that the medical records submitted to this estate had some formatting inconsistencies. The line spacing was irregular in a way that institutional documents typically are not. I wrote it down and kept looking. The room was completely still. I looked up the clinic online. There was no website, no patient portal, no professional footprint beyond a basic directory entry. I found the physician's license number in the submitted document and checked it against the National Medical Licensing Board's public verification system. It returned no result. I called the board directly to confirm. They told me the number did not correspond to any registered physician. I paused. I brought everything I found to Mr. Adewale. He submitted the formal verification request. The letter you just heard is the official response. I had not raised my voice once. I had not pointed fingers. I had not made accusations dressed up as questions. I had simply explained what I had done in sequence with documents to support every step. Aunt Cora was looking at me differently now. Bayo had his head slightly bowed. Uncle Patrick had put his glasses back on. Nadia's lead attorney leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She shook her head once, slowly. She was not going to fight this. She could see there was nothing left to fight with. The meeting moved forward from that point with a kind of quiet efficiency. Mr. Adewale formally recorded that the medical documentation provided in support of the trust restructuring proposal had failed verification on 2 counts. The clinic and the physician were both unregistered, and that a third check against the pregnancy registry had returned no record. On that basis, the trust could not be legally established. Nadia's trustee request was denied. Her attorney made one more attempt, suggesting that the estate finalization be delayed while alternative documentation was sourced. Mr. Adewale explained, patiently and precisely, that a delay would require cause, and that the failure of submitted documentation was not cause for delay, but rather cause for dismissal of the claim. The estate officials present confirmed this interpretation. One of them noted, quietly and formally, that submitting fabricated medical documentation in an estate proceeding constituted a serious legal matter, and that the record of this meeting would be preserved in full. He said the word investigation once, carefully, and let it sit in the room without expanding on it. Nadia's attorneys gathered their papers. They did not make further arguments. The family around the table had gone very quiet. There were no more congratulations, no more warm nods in Nadia's direction. The energy that had flowed toward her on the night of the announcement, the sympathy, the excitement, the goodwill, had completely receded. People were not hostile. They were simply and visibly stunned. I sat in my chair. I did not celebrate. I had nothing to celebrate. This was the exposure of a deception. It was not a victory. It was the end of something. After the formal part of the meeting concluded, the estate officials and Mr. Adewale stepped out briefly to prepare the final documentation. The family remained at the table in a heavy, uncertain quiet. Aunt Cora was the first to speak. She looked at me directly. "You knew," she said, not as an accusation, more like a recognition. "I suspected," I said. Then I looked into it carefully. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because I needed proof," I said. "Not suspicion. Proof. And I needed it to be in the right room at the right time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father would have done the same thing." That hit me harder than I expected. Bayo, who had said very little since the revelations began, leaned forward. "She called me 2 weeks ago," he said. "She told me you were being difficult, that you were refusing to cooperate with the attorneys." He paused. "I almost came to you with pressure. I'm glad I didn't." Across the table, Nadia had not moved. Her attorneys had left the room. She sat alone in her chair, her notebook still closed and untouched in front of her. She looked at me once. I looked back. I did not say anything mean. I did not need to. What had been exposed needed no commentary from me. She stood up, quietly pushed her chair back, and walked toward the door. She did not address the family. She did not address me. She simply left the room, and the door closed softly behind her. That softness felt like the end of a chapter one had been living in for a long time. After everyone had gathered themselves and stepped out into the hallway for coffee, Mr. Adewale called me back into the room. He closed the door gently behind us. "There's something else I want you to know," he said. He sat down and opened the original estate file. "I should have walked you through this in our first meeting, but the situation escalated before we had a chance." He turned a document toward me. It was a clause buried in the estate's foundational legal structure, something my father had added years before he passed. A quiet, careful addition.
The clause stated that all estate assets were held under a specific protected trust structure that required the sole named beneficiary, me, to be the primary authorizing party for any restructuring or transfer. No secondary party, including a spouse, could be granted trustee status over the core assets without the beneficiary's direct, uncoerced, documented consent. I read it twice. "What does this mean?" I asked, though I suspected. "It means the trust restructuring she was pushing for could never have been legally executed without your clear and voluntary agreement," Mr. Adewale said. "Even if the medical documentation had been real, even if the pregnancy had been genuine, the mechanism she was using to gain trustee status was not available to her under the terms your father built into this estate." I stared at the document. "She exposed herself," I said slowly. "She submitted fraudulent documents. She pressured the family. She tried to access funds early. She did all of it, and the legal structure she was trying to exploit didn't even allow it." "Yes," Mr. Adewale said simply. I sat back in my chair and breathed. I asked Nadia to move out 2 weeks after the meeting. I did not do it in anger. I did not do it publicly. I went home one evening, sat at the kitchen table, and when she came in I told her as calmly and directly as I could that the marriage was over. She did not argue. She had expected it, I think. The days since the meeting had been quiet in a way that was different from the calculated quiet of the weeks before. This was the quiet of aftermath, of things already broken. She packed what she needed over the following days and arranged for the rest to be collected later. We spoke very little. Not out of hostility, more out of an absence of anything useful left to say. We had crossed too far into something irreversible. I had loved her. That part was real, even if a lot of what she had done was not. And I found that loving someone and deciding to leave them can exist in the same moment without either thing canceling the other out. My lawyer filed the separation papers within the month. Given what had occurred, and given the documented evidence from the estate proceeding, my legal standing was very clear. The estate remained entirely intact. Her claims had no foundation. The separation was straightforward in a legal sense, even if nothing about it felt simple in a human one. The night after she collected the last of her things, I walked through the house slowly. Each room felt both smaller and larger at the same time. Emptier, obviously, but also cleaner. Like a window had been opened somewhere and fresh air was finally moving through. I sat in the living room for a long time. Just sat. The weeks that followed were strange in a way I had not expected. I had spent so much mental energy on staying calm, staying focused, gathering facts, and waiting for the right moment that when it was all over, I did not quite know what to do with the stillness. I went back to work. I cooked simple meals. I took long walks in the evenings. I started sleeping through the night again, which told me something about how much tension I had been carrying without fully acknowledging it. Aunt Cora called me regularly. She did not bring up the estate meeting directly. She just called to talk, to check in, to tell me small things about family life. That mattered more than she probably knew. Bayo came by one Saturday afternoon with food and a six-pack, and we sat on the back porch for 3 hours and said very little. He apologized once for almost being used against me. I told him she had been careful and convincing, and that he had nothing to apologize for. He nodded. We left it there. I thought a lot about my father during those weeks. About how he had built things patiently and quietly. About how he had always said that the things worth having take time and attention to protect. I used to think he was talking about money when he said that. Standing on the other side of everything that had happened, I understood he had meant something much larger. He had meant your life. Your clarity. Your sense of who you are. Those things require just as much careful tending as any financial asset. Maybe more. I started to think about what I wanted the next chapter to look like. I met with Mr. Adewale one more time after the separation was finalized. This time the meeting had a different feel, lighter. There were no crises to manage. No documents to scrutinize. We were just two men settling the final details of a completed process. The estate was formally released in full to me. The property, the savings, the investments, the insurance payout. All of it legally and cleanly mine, exactly as my father had intended. Mr. Adewale walked me through several options for how to manage the assets going forward. He recommended a financial advisor he trusted. He outlined some tax considerations. He gave me his honest opinion on which parts of the portfolio to keep liquid and which to let grow over time. At the end of the meeting, as I was getting up to leave, he said something I have thought about many times since. Your father was a man who understood that the best defense is building things well from the beginning, he said. He built this estate so that it would protect you even when you might not see the threat coming. He thought of you. I shook his hand. I did not trust my voice quite enough to say what I wanted to say. I walked out of the building and stood on the pavement for a moment. The city moved around me, cars, voices, someone laughing somewhere nearby. Life going forward in every direction. My father had thought of me. He had quietly built something solid and left it for me to stand on. The least I could do was stand on it well. I took 3 weeks off work. I had not taken real, unstructured time off in years. Not since before Nadia's business launch, when every vacation had been redirected into a planning session or a client call. I booked a small cabin a few hours north of the city and drove there with a bag and 2 books. I did very little. Walked in the morning. Read in the afternoon. Cooked simple food in the evenings. Slept without an alarm. Something in me needed the silence to finish settling. Everything that had happened over the past several months, the announcement, the pressure, the legal maneuvering, the discovery, the exposure, the separation, had all moved so quickly. I had spent the whole time responding, observing, planning, holding things steady. I had not actually had a moment to feel it. Out there in the quiet, I let myself feel it. There was grief. Not for the loss of the estate or the stress of the scheme. Those things had resolved clearly. The grief was for the marriage I thought I had, and the woman I thought I was married to. 11 years is a long time. Even when a relationship ends for clear reasons, you still mourn the version of it you believed in. I sat with that grief honestly. I let it move through me instead of managing it. And slowly, over those 3 weeks, it began to shift into something else. Not bitterness. Something quieter. A kind of sad, clear-eyed acceptance that some people are not who you need them to be, and that discovering that, though painful, is not the end of your story. It is just the honest starting point of the next one. When I came back from the cabin, I made some decisions. The first was about the estate property. My father's building on the east side was in a neighborhood that had changed significantly in the 10 years since he purchased it. I had options: sell it, lease it commercially, develop it. I spent time with the financial advisor Mr. Adewale had recommended, a careful woman named Ms. Abayoy, who walked me through the numbers without rushing me. I decided to renovate and lease a portion of the space to a small community organization that ran after-school programs for kids in the neighborhood. A modest lease rate, enough to make it sustainable, not enough to price them out. The remaining units I leased commercially at market rate to stabilize the income. It was not the highest return option, but it felt like the right one. It felt like something my father would have understood. The second decision was about my career. I had been in the same project management role for 6 years. I was good at it, but the past few months had shown me something about myself, a capacity for careful thinking under pressure, for reading situations clearly, for keeping emotions in check when they needed to be in check. Those were not just survival skills. They were professional ones. I started looking at senior strategy roles. Within 4 months, I had moved into a position that suited me better and paid significantly more. I was not rebuilding. I was building forward. There is a difference. Rebuilding implies returning to something. I was not going back to anything. About 6 months after the separation was finalized, I had a conversation with Bayo that I think about sometimes. We were at his place for dinner with his wife, Tola, and a couple of their friends. It was a good evening, warm, easy, the kind of company that requires nothing from you except to show up. After dinner, Bayo and I ended up on the balcony while Tola and the others cleared the table. He asked me how I was doing. Not in the surface way people sometimes ask, but in the careful way of someone who actually wants to know. I told him the truth. That I was well. That I was surprised by how well, honestly. That there were hard days when something small triggered a memory and I had to just sit with it. But that the overall direction was forward, and that forward felt good. You handled that whole thing differently than most people would have, he said. I didn't have a choice, I said. If I'd gotten loud, I would have lost. He was quiet for a moment. I think you had a choice. You just made the right one. I thought about that. About all the moments when I had wanted to react and had chosen to observe instead. About how strange it felt in those moments, how against my instincts it was to stay calm when something in me wanted to fight back loudly. My father never raised his voice when it really mattered, I said. He always said that loud strength is for the moment. Quiet strength is for the outcome. Bayo nodded slowly. You're very much his son, he said. There is a photograph of my father on my desk. He is standing in front of the property on the east side, not the polished building it is now, but the original structure he bought when the neighborhood was still rough and uncertain. He is wearing a plain white shirt, his hands in his pockets, not smiling widely, but there is a quiet satisfaction on his face that I have come to understand better as I've gotten older. He is looking at something he built from nothing. And he knows it is solid. I think about what it takes to build something that lasts, not just financially, but in yourself. The patience it requires. The willingness to move slowly when everything in you wants to rush. The discipline to stay clear-eyed when the people around you are being steered by emotion. I did not come through what happened without cost. I lost a marriage. I lost a version of my future I had believed in. I lost the easy trust one used to carry into relationships, that uncomplicated openness I once thought was a virtue. It is not entirely gone, but it has been recalibrated. I do not think that is a loss. I think it is an adjustment, the kind that comes when you survive something and emerge with clearer eyes. What I kept was more important than what I lost. I kept the estate my father built for me. I kept my name clean. I kept my clarity intact. And I kept something I had almost forgotten I had. The quiet, steady certainty that I am enough. Not because I won something. Not because someone else lost. But because when it mattered, I showed up for myself, calmly, carefully, and completely. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is just prepared. And that is enough.